All right, all right, all right. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. We're live, and I got Natalia here with me today. She's been doing some really incredible stuff. We're going to be sharing her backstory, how she got into this whole world of Jeffersonian style dinners to building base. I think a good place to maybe start is with your background. From what I understand, you're a third culture kid. Third culture kids are always pretty cool to me. They have interesting stories. It's my understanding that you've spent some time in Cuba. I think your parents are Cuban and Russian, and then you lived in China. So help me unpack that because that sounds really
A
cool
lot going
to
on.
me.
Yeah. How are you? Thank you for having me. It's such a treat to be here. Excited for our conversation. Um, I share your sentiment about third culture kids. I do think it places you in really interesting settings to have to change your kind of your settings and your surroundings and figure out how your identity adapts to that as a kid. So I think it makes for interesting adults. Not to say that other people are not interesting adults, but I do think third culture kids have some really interesting mechanisms for viewing and understanding the world. So at least that's been my experience. So I'm half Cuban and half Russian. I was born in Cuba. I spent a lot of time in Russia, Cuba, and then I grew up in Mexico. Then I came to the US and I've spent a lot of time in the Northeast. So Boston, New York. I now live in Miami. And then I've had stints abroad. So I've spent a little bit of time in South Africa, a little bit of time in Israel, a little bit in France, a little bit in China, all kind of in little sprints for very different things, usually work related or project related. And now my home is Miami.
Beautiful. And what would you say was the draw to you start? Like, did any of that influence, like being a third culture kid, influence like your draw towards behavioral psychology and like dinners? Like, how does that play into
Sure. I mean, I
where
think a
like
lot
how,
of it.
your call? Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of it. So there's an element for me. So I'm also an only child, which I think for me, the intersection of those things is what plays into it. When you're undergoing, and I always say this to people who have only children. I think if you're living a life that's very predictable and very normal, being an only child I'm sure, feels great. But when you're living a life that has so much change and unpredictability, being an only child can feel really lonely because you don't have peers. You
Mm-hmm.
have your family, obviously, your parents, but you don't have a peer group. And so I think for me, there was very early on this feeling of what is my peer group? How do I design a peer group? What extends beyond my family as elected and chosen family? And what does that mean in terms of community? How do I feel in community? And understanding that being in community in very different places meant very different things, and sometimes different on ramps, different behaviors, different expectations. And so there was very early on this interest, I would say, and this attraction to being and finding community. And then, with obviously, as I matured and became an adult, there became kind of a layer to that was more intellectual curiosity and figuring out what are the elements of that one can study or one can integrate, one can be fascinated by, but from a more academic or professional perspective. So that really led me to think about group behavior and groups of people and group dynamics, which has been the through line, I would say, for probably my entire career in one way or
Yeah.
another, right? So, what drives group behavior? What creates groups in the first place? How do we help groups behave better or function better or access kind of or be generated in a more useful way? And so, groups are effectively the thing that I'm most passionate about. I always joke, when people find out that I'm a psychologist, the joke is always like, "Oh, are you analyzing me?" And my answer is like, genuinely no, because you're one
Right.
person and I don't care. Like, I'm like, if you're one person, I don't
Right.
care. If you're three people or more, I really care. So,
Right. Right. Because
yeah.
behavioral psychology, as I understand it, it's the study of groups. It's not the individual. Correct? Am
So
I
I
missing?
studied organizational psychology, which is the study
Or
of groups.
organizational? Sorry,
Yeah.
organizational, not behavior.
Yeah.
Um,
I
when
did a
was
bunch of
your
other stuff, but that was my big, I would say that's when I kind of discovered, oh, you can do this. This is an actual thing. People do this. Right. So,
when did you discover or figure out this concept of Jeffersonian style dinners? Do you remember like the some of the early dinners that you did many moons
yeah,
ago?
I actually first heard about it. I actually think from my dad. He sent me an article on I want to say I don't want to misspeak, but I'm pretty sure that it was someone from Thomas Jefferson's estate, so someone from Monticello and the museum, um, published something explaining this concept. Um, and my dad sent it to me because he thought it was really interesting and kind of the through line between something that we can learn from a historical perspective on a historical figure and whether or not something of that would be relevant today. And I fell in love with it. I thought it was such a fascinating and interesting concept. And I happened to have gotten together at around the same time with two really good friends of mine. And I brought this up. And I remember because we were at the Russian Turkish baths, which is a very unusual place for ideas to come about. But I remember I made a comment about this, and another one of them had also read something coincidentally about Jeffersonian dinners. And we had this moment of synchronicity where we were like, oh my gosh, this is have we already been kind of doing this? And both, I realized that I had already been doing dinners in a bit of a Jeffersonian style prior to really understanding that this is what they're called and there's a methodology to it. And there's some variables that make it, let's say, a Jeffersonian dinner. And so we decided to try to do some. So for me, I would say informally, I had already been doing dinners probably for like 2 years before that point, with under this umbrella of being more intentional about how we make a dinner, right? So not just gathering people around a table and being like, great, well, we're here together, good for us, but having an intentionality and having a bit of a structure and thinking through the dynamics of the group, largely because that was my starting point and my curiosity place in the first place. Then I learned to kind of give it a name and to add a little bit more structure to it. And then I went on to make them my own, right? So Jeffersonian dinners, the actual concept is relatively simple. And then, I've gone on to do what I would call like Jeffersonian inspired or Jeffersonian style dinners, because then they take on, versions of things that I've learned and, methodologies that I've adapted from that concept over the years.
What are some of the things that you do differently versus like maybe what the traditional format is, or at least how you think about like convening people for a dinner?
Sure. A Jeffersonian dinner is kind of defined by having one main topic, right? Or like one main
Mhm.
question, which I think, you can interpret it in different ways. I interpret that as there usually is a theme, but you can break it up into very different pieces. Or sometimes the theme is connecting people around just a substantive table. And so you can have very different beginning, middle, and ends. So I tend to divide my dinners into beginning, middle, and ends, where I think of the beginning portion as kind of an introduction, not an icebreaker, because I think an icebreaker sounds kind of cliche and kitschy, but more like a warm up and a space where very different people who may be in very different moments can come together, right? So, however it is that you arrived here, the goal is to set a middle ground where you have, everyone who needs a different on ramp has a different on ramp and a leveling place so that we're in the same, we're having the same moment and the same experience. Sometimes that's
Sure,
because one of us is having a horrible day and someone needs a little bit of a different space to come into and land into the experience. Sometimes it's because another person is very introverted and some of the people at the table are extroverted and kind of ready to jump right in, but the introverted person needs a little bit of a different space to kind of enter the conversation, right? And so I like to think of
sure.
that beginning, not just as that, well, good, tell me your favorite, what's your favorite color? Tell me your favorite thing from today, or whatever kind of cliche thing we can think about, but more as a place, as a preamble, right? Like, and really use it as a preamble. How do we define what our values are for this conversation? What our values are as a group, right? As soon as you've come together, you're a group. You may be complete strangers, but for the sake of this exercise, you are now a group. So what are the expectations around this group? What are the values that this group has for the next, 2, 3 hours? How do we make sure that everyone is kind of coming into this conversation and landing here before we start the conversation, right? So there's this real sense of beginning as opposed to just, hey, how are you? Give me your name and what you do, and let's go around the table for a quick second. So anyway, I would say I don't think it's not Jeffersonian informed. I would just say that it's my evolution of the traditional Jeffersonian concept is to really break these dinners down into, there's kind of a preamble that level sets everyone. There's a middle, which is kind of the juice of the conversation, and then there's an end that hopefully feels whatever it is you want people to feel, right? Like, what's your intent? Do you want people to feel inspired? You want people to feel connected? You want people to feel hopeful? You want people to feel ideal? You want people to feel something good, right? But like,
Right.
what's the end? And then how do you build and design for that? That's an
What would
example.
be what would be like a like an example of like something someone would say, like if I'm a host and I'm hosting the dinner, or like I'm the person that's like taking the lead and being that first point of contact in the room, like what is an example of something that like I may say or something that I may do to set the level of the room or the mood, or kind of like bring people to up to that level of where we want the vibe to be.
Sure. And this is my answer, I would say, for almost any setting, maybe not every setting, but I would say almost all. And I would say humor. I think,
Interesting.
very often, again, there are some very specific settings where humor is completely not appropriate, right? Like, but most of the time, and again, within the bounds of the conversation, if you're in a professional context, the degree to which you can be, funny or silly is very different from if you're at a dinner with friends or friends of friends, right? So
Sure.
relatively speaking, I think humor can be a really incredible tool for level setting and really bringing out the human element in the room, right? Like even at the most professional or formal of conversations, the experience is a lot more enjoyable if you feel like you're actually getting to know people and not the versions of people that they're trying to present. So
Hmm.
if the goal, and for me this is a goal, for me the goal is always to have as authentic an experience as possible, and for people not to come with their 12 identities and their, seven masks that they put on and like keep alternating depending on who they're talking to, but ideally for people to show up as authentically as they can, in service of the topic of the conversation. Humor can be a really great way of breaking that down a little bit, right? So how you start the tone, what can help make people more comfortable and can help redirect them away from, okay, let me maybe not sell my company right now to everybody. Let me say something that's maybe a little bit different or a little bit odd, or let me answer this question a little bit in an unexpected way, right? So I think creating elements of humor and kind of whimsy and things that take people out of their, I have a
The
thing and my plan
box.
is a thing and this is the plan and one, two, three. We all enter and usually we all operate in these spaces, and how we derail people from that can be, um, I think is really important and can be little things. It doesn't have to be kind of like a big shock.
Yeah, that's helpful. I would have thought you would have said like vulnerability. That like would have
Mhm.
been the first thing that came to mind, but humor is actually interesting. And I can see how that shifts the room and kind of makes everybody put their guard down, so to speak.
Right. So to me, I think being, especially let's say if you're in a group setting with people that you don't know or not as well, or it's a professional context, I think you can be, I think you can use humor in different ways and you can absolutely use it as a defense and deflection mechanism. But I think if you lean into using humor, for the sake of connection and and to kind of facilitate a more authentic space, it is a vulnerable thing to do.
Sure. No,
You don't have to
that's a good
necessarily be like,
reframe.
let me tell you my deep, dark trauma in order to like be vulnerable, right? Like
Right, right,
you
right.
can just be honest about like something funny or make a comment about your day or say like, you know, I don't know. Wow, like this year has really, it's not started like I wanted it to start. It's really been a rough beginning. I'm not saying that's the case for me, but I'm saying if someone says that to you, you're like, wow, that's a somewhat vulnerable thing to say, to
Yeah.
kind of admit that so far 2026 is not going according to plan, right? So I think you can be a little silly and use that as a conduit for being vulnerable without getting into the spaces of vulnerability that can sometimes be too much for people or be a bit too exposed.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. What's fascinating about your background, Natalia, is you've done a lot of different things. And I think this is I'm curious that my hypothesis is that the reason why you've been able to build something like base is because you have this kind of like varied background and you've done all these different things, from the CIC Miami um into working with, you know, nonprofits. Tell me more about how that plays into, like, how did that play into the starting of base and like the foundation of what you
Sure.
guys have built? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think so for me, I've always at some point, I would say I started to become a generalist, and I think I've kind of leaned into that. Um, Not that there's anything better or worse about that, but I think I've generally built a career off of being a generalist and someone who can plug into very different environments and do very different things. There's definitely some themes to the work that I tend to do and some things that I'm not good at. So, not, being realistic here, but I think the generalist mindset is a really curious one. And in my experience, at least, it has helped me be, and this is very relevant for base, but it has helped me be kind of very comfortable in settings that are 0 to 1, right? And very comfortable kind of taking a bet on something that I think is a good idea and trying it out. So I think when you, and I ascribe this, maybe there are other explanations for this, but I ascribe this to having a bit of this generalist mindset and this very varied experience because, I've worked with, unicorn tech companies, and I've worked with nonprofits, and I've worked
Sure.
with, physical infrastructure, and I've worked with digital communities. So these are kind of all very different things. And so when I'm presented with a problem, my mindset tends to be very curious because I'm like, well, which bucket could a solution come from? And it's not
Mhm.
apparent to me from the start, right? I think if when you're, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But when you have like a lot of tools, you're like, well, wait a minute, which do I want to pull this in, pull this out? Do I want to push it in? How do I, like, what's the solution here? And I feel like that has been really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. What was the origins of base? I know you're in Miami now. Did
Mhm.
you originally start there?
We
I know you
did,
have
yeah.
other co-founders. Like, were you guys just hanging out one night and you're like, I think we should just actually create a business out of this. This is great.
No,
We have all these great.
no.
What's the backstory?
I wish. No. So I have two co-founders who are amazing. One of them was really brainstorming a bunch of different ideas. One of them ended up being the kind of the original version of Base, and he came to ask. We were friends and acquaintances in the tech community locally, and he came to ask for my advice. Kind of because I'd done so much community building and hosting and convening. So, and I was very happy to support him and give him, any know-how or structure or any help really that I could, as I've done to many other founders along the way in different industries. But the more we chatted and kind of as we continued to talk, it became a little bit apparent that this was kind of, we were building we were potentially he was potentially going to be building a thing that was basically the core of everything that I did, right? So it was around community and engaging people meaningfully. And I was like, well, these are kind of all the things that I love and care for. And so it kind of became apparent that maybe we should join forces. And then we needed a third technical co founder. And and this is very base like, I had gone to a pasta making gathering at a friend's house where I had met this lovely gentleman who had been the CTO of a venture backed company locally and was currently on a bit of a sabbatical. And one of his passion topics was brainstorming communities, but from a tech perspective and kind of an algorithmic perspective. And so when we started looking for a CTO and a technical co founder, I thought about this guy that I had met one time, but gotten a really good vibe from. And I was like, let's revisit this guy. And so I connected him to my other co founder, and then it became the three of us.
Awesome. What's the philosophy behind how you guys match, right? Like, so we talked offline about this idea of affinity versus plurality, and I'm sure
Sure.
you can break this down, but like, I think generally when people are gathering a group, they tend, I think, to default to like income or social status, or you have this thing, therefore you are in the group.
Yep.
It seems like from the outside looking in that you guys are doing something different. Is that
Yep.
correct? Yeah.
That is correct. So I kind of would say two things here. The first is I think human beings, by their nature, tend towards affinity, right? Either I would say affinity or transactionality. So most of the time, we're either seeking to solve a need that we have, right? Like I need clients. And so therefore I'm going to go to places where my clients may be. And I'm going to go engage with these people to find clients, right? So there's a transaction either expected or happening, or places of affinity. And there's nothing wrong with either of these, right? I think especially, you know, spaces of affinity can be really meaningful as kind of supportive, structured environments. I think it can be really safe to be engaging with people that are like you in X way, right? You know, you see this a lot with young parents, right? So people who are, you know, first time parents, they really seek out other first time parents because they're like, oh my God, you know what I'm talking about? This is crazy. And they're like, yes, it is, you know, and
Right.
it is good to have another person that's like, yes, we got this. So I think spaces of affinity can be really meaningful. But in all of the summaries, you know, if you leave people to their own devices, these are the two main directions that people generally choose behaviorally. It's hard for people to actively and consciously be like, you know what I'm going to do? I want to be surrounded by people who are very different from me because that's a good use of my time. It's difficult for people to make that decision consciously because it kind of does require more work and effort and energy to do that. So that's kind of the main one thought around that. The second thought around that is when you as a human, and this is something that I do a lot, which is why I can tell you the difference. When you try to match people as an individual, the human brain can only do so much complexity at a time, right? Which is why, to your point, you default to a couple of things, right? I'm putting together a dinner party at my house and I'm going to be like, okay, well, who do I think would get along? And really, if you dig into that question, what's underneath that is, usually, right? Am I inviting people of like within the same age range? Am I inviting people that kind of work in the same thing so they could talk about that? Am I inviting people that share a particular interest, right? Oh my God, everyone here loves tennis. I feel like that's fun. So like, but you can only do so many things. Like right? You can only keep track of, let's say, three variables.
Three.
After
Yeah.
that, you start to really, you know, the brain starts to not be able to handle that. And so you end up, even in your best attempts as a person, with pretty homogenous groups, especially if you're doing this over time. What we try to do is kind of break both of these pieces, right? Like when you're matching with an algorithm, and an algorithm can learn, number one, can keep track of many more variables at a time, right? And can match and can weigh them differently and can match, keeping into account layers of compatibility as opposed to just, well, you two, like you're in the same kind of this and this and this. Oh, I'm done, right? Like you can keep in mind so many more things. You can keep surprising and engaging people in very different types of configurations and dynamics. And we fundamentally believe that people need to experience and really thrive and are delighted by spaces that are plural. And the feedback would suggest that, right? Like you walk into a room and you're like, I don't really know about this, but you almost always end up walking out being like, wow, I would never have chosen these people. Like if you had given me a chance, I would never have organized these people into a single room. But how incredible that we did because the perspectives were different, the conversations were surprising. You know, people have a lot more. There's a lot more dissonance, but there's also a lot more richness in that dissonance. And so we match for plurality as opposed to affinity.
How do you create anticipation and like mystery? How do you create mystery and surprise with an element where you're matching people based on this like an algorithm, right? Like or like what do you guys do to what's your flavor of that, right? Cuz like I think part of an event, part of going to something is like I think the plurality is one piece, but maybe there's the venue, maybe there's the theme, maybe how you organize it. What's that for you guys?
Yeah, I'm a big believer. I'm kind of, I'll share pieces of this, but I won't share a lot because obviously we want people to be in it and trying it and feeling it good, you know, feeling good within the community by experiencing it. But I would say I'm a big believer in the element of surprise. I think it makes people very uncomfortable. And I don't believe that our job is to make people less comfortable. I think that our job is to help people walk through their discomfort, right? Um, Human beings in general experience a deep sense of satisfaction when they have gone through a thing that they're nervous about and they've gone through that thing successfully. And so I don't mind at all that people feel uncomfortable, that they don't know who's coming to dinner, that they don't know what the topic of the dinner is, that they can't prepare for anything. This, in fact, I mean, people do not respond well to this. And in
Right.
general, I've always hosted dinners this way, and people do not, they get very nervous. They feel like they can't prepare. They're not going to be able to show off their best self or, you know, whoever that is. And that is intentional. That's the whole point. So I think there are elements of there are a lot of micro ways that you can prime people along the way in the language that you use, in the ways that you introduce the concept of the dinner. Kind of in there's little things here and there that I think you that are can be really powerful in nudging people, to kind of use a behavioral economic term, to kind of nudge people towards the behavior that you want. Um, but then ultimately, I think, all of the little things accumulate into people being able to show up a bit more open minded, a bit more authentic, a bit less, plug and play. I know exactly how this is going to go. And I do think the core pieces of that are just not revealing a lot of information, so that people have to adapt in the moment and not do I'm hyper prepared and I've already researched everyone and everything.
Love it. Yeah, I think not revealing the location and kind of people having to like wait until like a couple of days before is kind of cool. Builds that
Yeah.
anticipation factor. I think you guys do that.
Yeah, we do. And also the thing about it that is, the way that I would think about that, just for hopefully people, whoever's listening to this feels inspired to host dinners and host gatherings and convene people. So kind of thinking about it in that application, the way that I would think about this is, you know, again, even a professional experience, you want people to enter this space curiously and openly. And
Mhm,
most professional or networking gatherings, that's not how people enter the space, right? So anything that is the opposite of how normally these things happen helps derail people a little bit, right? So if you're invited to a dinner that says, Tech Founder Dinner, and that's the title of the dinner, and you know everything about this dinner, right? Like where it's happening and the location and the agenda and the play by play. This is what you would expect from a networking event, right? So the title,
mhm.
the agenda, the information, the logistics. So you treat it as such. You're like, okay, this is a networking event. I'm like, whoop, got it. I'm going to go in that direction. If you do the opposite of that and you don't reveal information, or you call something a weird name, or you don't know who else is coming, or you don't even know the location, it starts to be like, well, what is this? you know and that's
Are
the
they trying
goal.
to kidnap me?
Right, exactly. Is this like, I don't know if I'm going to a work event, or is this a weird secret society, or like, is this a
Right,
dungeon? Like, where am I going? That's part of the point. Right?
right.
That's part of the point.
That's awesome. I think something else that you guys do is interesting is that you have these like I think they're called archetypes. Can you explain that? Like why go down that path? That seemed like something that was unique and interesting that I hadn't seen before.
Sure. I think to a degree, there's a couple of answers for this, but to a degree, I think it's helpful for people to be able to um, kind of self identify, and to have a
Mhm.
lot of options as to how they self identify, right?
Mm.
Ultimately, we view base as a community, and as it's not a membership, organization in the traditional sense. We hope that people feel a sense of real engagement with the other folks that they're meeting, and that there's elements and behaviors that associate with a community, as opposed to just a membership organization. And in order to kind of to elicit more of that, and for people to feel more of that, there's a couple things that we've done. One of them is the archetypes, right? So it's allowing people to kind of self-identify with a role, or like a type of member in the community, without it being exclusionary of any other type of member.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. I thought of like the Alchemist.
Mhm.
Like I don't know if one of them's the Alchemist, but like
It is.
the branding in that like made me think of the Alchemist. Um, if somebody's starting an event, like if they're thinking about, from like our audience, people out there, we have creatives, we have founders, we have people that are working at tech companies. If there's like a set of rules, I know like rules are made to be broken and maybe you don't believe in rules, but like if there's some foundational principles outside of, what we've talked about with the plurality, what would those be for you?
Sure. So, for anyone kind of thinking about starting any sort of gathering, I would recommend checking out Priya Parker's work. She talks about, I think her book is literally titled The Art of Gathering. There are a bunch of other books that I think are really great, but I think she does a really good job of breaking down very, very core. principles. One of those, which I want to kind of, give her a nod because I would have said this as well, but I think she does a really good job explaining this, is really understanding for yourself and communicating for others what is the intent and the purpose of this gathering. Now, the purpose can be joy, right? The purpose doesn't have to be solving this infrastructure issue, right? Like it can be anything, but being clear on what the purpose of the gathering is. Because I
Sure.
think that, and that sounds really basic, but you'd be shocked by by how not basic that is, because a lot of people gather and they're not really clear on kind of what the point of this gathering is. Or they're afraid to call the point of the gathering something that's not productive, let's say, right? So, like, maybe the point of the gathering is just to develop a new tradition, right? Like, I started a tradition with a really good friend of mine last year, where we get together with a bunch of friends of ours who bake, and we set a theme for the brunch, and we all have to bake something from that theme, and we gather and kind of talk about the things that we baked and talk about many other topics. The sole purpose of this was because we wanted to start a new tradition, right? And
Mm,
there's no larger agenda. There's no like secret other meaning. It's just we had different friend groups that kind of overlap but didn't fully overlap, and we wanted to bring them together under this kind of umbrella of establishing a new tradition. And so we did. But I feel like that's a big one for me, is really understanding kind of what is the point of for why we're gathering. So I would say that's one. And the second one is, I would say two more. I'll make my other two examples briefer, but um, the other one is really kind of breaking it down. I kind of contradict myself in this way because I love a good detail. Like I host dinner parties at my home, and I'm one of those people who like loves the little nameplate and wants the little, I want this thing this way, and I like a little flower that looks like this that matches the other flower. Like I'm one of those people. I love a good detail. I love a good table setting. And it matters. It makes things whimsical and lovely. But the reality is that it doesn't actually matter, right? Like you can have a really incredible conversation and gathering with pizza sitting on the floor if the rest of the elements are there. And so I think, yes, place attention and effort into the logistics and the delivery and to how something is presented. But I would say don't overcomplicate it, right? A lot of people don't
mm,
host things because they're afraid that it's not going to be this like every button is buttoned up type of gathering. And most often than not, you can create a lot of meaning and meaningful discourse through the other elements. It doesn't have, not everything has to be like super buttoned up. So I would say that.
great. Thanks for that. I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about your writing. It's do you have you been writing for some time? I know you launched a newsletter, I think, a year ago.
A year ago. Yeah.
Did you are you writing a book? Are you working on something that you can share? Like
So
it seems like it's like the way it's like laid out is that it's going to be a book, but
Oh,
maybe.
that's actually no. Well, thank you for saying that. That's really funny. So I used to write a lot. I would say maybe like 10 years ago. I used to write a
Okay.
lot. I really enjoyed it. It was a mix of creative writing and more kind of journalistic writing. Um, yeah, I really enjoyed it and I felt really called to it. And now I think I realized at the end of 2024 that I was writing a lot less. And I was really struggling, as I think this is true for most of us right now, with the advent of all the technologies and AI and all the things. I think we really struggle to write like long form.
Yeah.
And I was feeling a lot of that where I was like, it's not that I don't have thoughts. I have thoughts and a lot of ideas. I'm just really struggling to sit down and structure an article about it. And so the role of the newsletter was first and foremost kind of a personal way for me to really work on this, and if I committed to doing this with a certain frequency, I'd have to write some of these things out and also to break them down into a piece. A newsletter is not the same as writing a 7-page article. Like it's a lot
Right.
more accessible, and so I was like, well, I think this will help get my creative juices flowing so that I can look and feel about writing a little bit differently. Since then, I've really enjoyed it. I committed to doing it for a year, and now I've decided to do it for longer because the feedback that I've gotten has been really great, and I've also really enjoyed it.
It's really good.
Thank you. I
It's
really
really good.
enjoy it. So I'm excited to kind of keep doing it. I haven't thought beyond that yet. Um, haven't thought in terms of what would I want to do with it, but it has helped me get my creative juices flowing. So I feel like I'm a lot more open and able, and kind of now I'm workshopping an article that I want to write about something. So it's helped move my writing space.
Where do you find your inspiration for writing? Yeah.
Honestly, I have a notes, like a phone note where I keep like random ideas as they come to me, and I have this for other things as well, like other creative projects. And I find, for me at least, I don't know how this is for other people, but for me, I get very irrelevant ideas in the weird, like in the very not related settings. Okay, like I'll be walking through a museum and something will happen. This has happened to me, and something will happen, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, and it will have nothing to do with the surrounding environment, but that's just where the idea will come. And so
Sure.
I try to write things down, which is why I always keep a journal with me. I always have a pen and paper. I always have I can do things in my notes app, because I feel like if you're paying attention to the world, you can
Mm.
pick up on a lot of ideas. And I'll actually say there's a book called Why Not, that's written by two Yale professors. I'm going to butcher their names right now because it's been a long time since I read it. But one of them is professor at the Yale Law School, and the other one's a professor at the business school. And the concept is everyday innovation, right? So their thesis, and they give a lot of examples in the book. So it's a book I really recommend. They give a lot of examples about how we think of innovation as this like magical invention space that happens to brilliant geniuses that are, really focused on something, and that's how they figure it out. And the reality
Mhm.
is that most innovation happens from people just paying attention. Like the average person noticing, like, well, it's weird that every time I do this, this thing falls over. Like, that's odd. I'm sure it's like, that's weird. Like, that keeps happening. That's odd. Should we do something that like helps it stand up? And then, you'll develop a stand up thingamajiggy that helps the thing not fall down. Right. So, um, their big thesis is the average person can be extremely creative and be extremely innovative if they're just paying attention. And that's
Uh,
also my strategy for writing. I think if I'm paying, it's my strategy for writing is the same as my strategy for photography. If you're paying attention to the world around you, you will catch things. And then, make run with them, but you will catch things if you're paying attention.
Love it. We have this segment that we do at the end of the show. It's called a one by one, one room that has shaped your career or who you've become today. One book that you gift most often. You actually just mentioned a book, so you can opt out of that one if
Sure.
you want. And then one quote or final thought. And it doesn't have to be relevant to this conversation, of course, but just in general.
Okay. One room. Hmm.
I'm sure you have many.
Oh, I have so many. I know, that's why I'm like, "Oh my
Uh,
god, I don't know how to pick one." There's so
It
many.
doesn't have
Well,
to
I'll
be
give
the
you kind of
best. It doesn't have to be the best one. It could be the one that's
I'm
coming
gonna
up
give
for
a
you right
very
now.
random one, because the ones that come to mind are like, well, my first big job, or like, all of these things that I think are kind of what people think of as like the most important rooms for them. I'm gonna give a very random room because I think this is relevant. So when I was graduating from college, and it's also kind of a funny story. So when I was graduating from college, I was in Boston, and I had never been to New York. Okay. I was 22 years old, had never been to New York. And I was like, well, something's, I don't remember what happened, but somehow I became inspired, and I wrote a blank, like in the website, like info at email to Tiffany and Company. And I sent them to the ether, like the black hole of internet at Tiffany and Company. And I sent them an email that basically said, like, hi, I'm, a young woman entering the professional world. And I feel like you all are really missing the mark with women of a certain age group. Right. I think the way that, and if you think like Tiffany's, not back in the day, but some decades ago, right? So I was like, I think you guys are really missing the mark, because you're associating yourselves with either like very young women and like young girls, or engagement and kind of marriage. And in both of these cases, you're associating your brand and your goods with things that other people buy for us. And you're kind of missing the segment of women that are empowered, that make their own money, that are excited to build their own lives, and that may want to buy something for themselves that they feel really proud of, completely unrelated from anyone else, a man or whoever, right? Like
Mm.
unassociated. And I was like, and point two, not everything has to have a heart. Okay. Like we can have more urban feels and more urban textures. And like, why is everything so highly girly? This is not representative of like the woman of today. I don't know why I sent this, but I was like, here are my thoughts, unsolicited, random, major brand. And I got an email back from them and they invited me to a meeting at their headquarters on Fifth Avenue, which I went
Wow.
to, having never been to New York. I remember I showed up and I was staying with a friend of mine who lived there, and I was like, I don't even know where I am. I don't know where Fifth Avenue is. I mean, this was a whole like this was very like a movie in the making. And I showed up to this meeting, and the very incredible person that I met with was like the head of part of their design team, and we had a really great conversation because ultimately she was like, we have spent like 3 years doing this user research to land at these conclusions. So like, where did you get these conclusions? And I was like, just being a person in the world, like just
Right.
being a human in the world and paying attention. And I mean, I don't know if I missed an opportunity there and I could have maybe parlayed this into some sort of career in the space. I wasn't called to it. I was being called to, I wanted to do something else. So I didn't move in that direction. But I had a really remarkable feeling where I was like, oh, number one, if you pay attention, you notice things. Number two, if you say
Mm.
things, sometimes people respond back, right? Like the number of things that I've gotten through cold emailing in my life should be studied, okay? Because it's been a lot of things. And I felt really, for such a young age, I felt incredibly empowered that not that I was right, because I think that's hubris and not the right approach, but that my opinion mattered, that if I spent time thinking and engaging in something, I could have observations that are relevant. Um, that like the corporate world wasn't some sort of like weird black hole that you couldn't penetrate, but that like you can have conversations with these people. They're also trying to figure out how to better do their product and how to better do their company. So I just think it was it was a great room. It was a fascinating room to be in. That would be my answer
That's
to
a
that.
phenomenal story at 22.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a
That's awesome.
random cold email. That's why I tell it's a little harder now. I think people are now more immune to cold emails because again, AI and all the things.
AI.
So
Yeah.
I think we're less open to that. But yeah, I'm a big believer in you go like try, right? Like try the thing, say the thing.
One quote or final thought.
Oh my goodness. So it's not a quote. I'm known for my quotes. So this is actually kind of shocking that I'm not giving you a quote, but um, I would say kind of a thought that I have about gathering is I feel like, and this is part of the motivation for base, but it is also part of the motivation for so many of the things that I do is when no matter how you look at it and how you slice it, we are currently in this very fascinating paradox where we are in the most kind of connected society in the world, and yet we feel the least connected. Right. So, like, it has never been easier to find, solve, talk to a person now than it is now at the moment. You want to find someone who crochets on Saturdays in your zip code, you probably can find this person, right? By like posting things online and uncovering them. So,
Mhm.
we're the most connected and yet we feel the least connected. And there's a lot of data and research around this. The US is even further kind of in all of these metrics than a lot of other societies. And so, as we lose a lot of these, we've lost and continue to lose a lot of these third spaces and these kind of ways of gathering and meaning making that are not driven by transaction. And our answer obviously as a company with base is to try to create a third space for that and to try to connect and convene people around that. But I would hope that anyone kind of listening to us and listening to kind of part of my journey feels empowered and open to doing whatever version of that is relevant for them. I think my experience has been that my life has been incredibly enriched by it. The lives of other people have been incredibly enriched by it. It really ripples, like gathering with intention, even if it's a couple of people, even if it's once a quarter, even if it's around kind of something random, it can be really enriching and it really deepens your experience of community. You don't have to be, alone crying in the corner to be someone that's affected by the, so-called loneliness epidemic. We're all lonelier, right? Like we're all less connected. And so finding ways and avenues of feeling more connected, I think starts with creating those spaces for ourselves and for the people that we know.
Well said. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you? Base, shout that out. That'd be great for the audience. Yeah.
Sure. So base.club. If you want to kind of, obviously we're always hiring as we expand. So if you're interested in working with us, you can check that out. Otherwise, if you're interested in becoming a member, you can also check that out and apply directly on the website. You can find me on LinkedIn, Natalia Martinez-Kalinina. It's a very long last name, so there's only one of me. I'm not that hard to track down. You can follow me on Substack. It's The Meaningful Drift is the name of my newsletter. And yeah, I'm always happy to connect with folks. So I've done so much cold outreach that I'm very responsive to cold outreach because I feel like karmically I have to do it. So yeah, happy to chat with anybody.